there's another location. It's called Greyfriars Kirkyard,
Oh yes, Greyfriars. Yeah.
also known as Greyfriars Graveyard.
Mm-hmm.
And again, there was another plague came through 1568.
Yes.
Um, and there were thousands of bodies that were
Mm-hmm.
buried in a mass grave in the location of what would become Greyfriars following that.
Great cemetery. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In 1879, several tons of human remains were dumped into Greyfriars, unearthed and transferred from St. Giles Cathedral
Okay.
because it was undergoing a restoration and an alteration at that time, and they
Right.
needed to remove the remains, and they were just dumped in mass at Greyfriars. Now, Greyfriars is, as you say, everything's on a hill. Greyfriars is on a hill.
Yeah.
But
It's
Greyfriars
Edinburgh. Everything's
actually
on a
used to
hill.
be down in a little valley. And of course, today it is not. If you go to Greyfriars, you're
Mm-hmm.
standing up on a hill and you can stand
Right.
there down onto the old town.
Mm-hmm.
So, why is it now a hill when it used to be a valley? Use your imagination.
That's it.
Yeah,
Right.
that's all I'm going to say on this. Use your imagination.
Yeah, that's how many bodies are buried, dumped, and used for fill.
Yep. And
Buried in there.
also in the 18th century, again, you had the body snatchers
Yes.
coming into the property, doing what they did, grabbing bodies, digging them up for medical research that they could sell to
Yeah, to the medical schools.
universities. And
And let me address that a little bit because
yep,
that's an area of expertise for me. Um, as morbid and weird as it is, it's one of those things that at that time, when we think about body snatching or, going in and digging up bodies, these had to be relatively fresh bodies. This was not someone who had been buried and had been in the cemetery for a month or a few months. This was a matter of that day or a prior day. And how the body snatchers, these people would know that these bodies were there. They didn't hang around the cemetery all day, waiting for someone to be buried, despite what, some movies and things like to portray. What they did is what we do nowadays. The newspapers, if they could read, there was still obituaries being placed in the paper, but there were death notices as well. And in those times, much like wedding bans or marriage bans, death notices were also posted. So it was a good indication. You knew that somebody had died. And so then it was just do the math as to where they were going to be, and how they would end up being buried. Some of them likely went in on a nightly basis just to look for fresh graves that had been, you see the earth had been turned over and then reburied. But Greyfriars is an interesting spot because we have a few of those cemeteries ourselves in Ontario that people don't talk about very often, that have many, many, many more bodies in them than what we know about. And they buried in layers. So if you think about it, in the 1700s, in the 1600s, in the 1500s, where you had a wave of plague roll through, and at that time, that location was on the far end of town, away from a lot of people where they actually lived. So they would put them there. And then again, the next time it happened and the next time. So of course, each time they're doing this, they're burying on top and then on top, and they're adding, and they're adding. But it's not just bodies, they're adding soil as well to that. So you're creating these mounds, and I've been on some archaeological digs that have been like that, where we have found a body, and then we dig down a little bit more, trying to, extrude that skeleton, and we find out that there's another burial underneath that burial. And with ground penetrating radar, you can see, like in some cases, there can be 4 or 5 layers of deceased people that have been buried on top of each other. So, yeah, so Greyfriars is probably one of these places where ground penetrating radar would be an interesting,
Oh, I can imagine.
thing to do. Yeah.
I could just imagine. So
So,
continuing with Greyfriars,
yeah.
because there's still more to the story
Oh, of course.
as to why it's so haunted. So in the 1600s, there was some kind of a religious uprising against the government,
Yes.
and there was, I guess we'll call it a civil war that kind of resulted from this. And there were 1,200 individuals that were imprisoned, and they were imprisoned at Greyfriars, which part of the grounds were turned into a POW prisoner of war camp, using part of the grounds, and some of the tombs that were there ended up being these prison huts, prison cells for these individuals, which is just bizarre. There was an individual named George Mackenzie who worked within the legal jurisdiction at that time, and this guy was just I guess he was just a sadistic SOB, because he inflicted all kinds of torture on these POWs.
Wow.
It's terrible. And the irony of George Mackenzie is that when he died, he was buried in Greyfriars, and his tomb is located right behind the area where this POW camp
Wow.
is. You can still see the remains of the camp. The tombs are still there. He was buried right behind it. So how ironic is that? But
as they say, karma.
yeah. So anyways, I guess dealing with everything that he did, and it just created this whole paranormal atmosphere. Because what they call now the Mackenzie poltergeist
Okay.
is his energy just inflicting all kinds of crazy paranormal instances in the area. His tomb is called the Black Mausoleum, just because the stone has turned black through age, and there's just all kinds of paranormal instances that take place. And I've got a book here on the hauntings of Edinburgh.
Oh, nice.
It's called City of the Dead, written by Andrew Henderson. And I just want to read a little quote here from the book that deals with Mackenzie and the Black Mausoleum at Greyfriars. And it reads, "The Black Mausoleum seems to differ from Edinburgh's other haunted locations for two reasons. One is the frequency of the poltergeist sightings. The other is the severity of the incidents. The period between the first recorded sightings, meaning Mackenzie and what was taking place, was in 1999. And in the present, it has seen hundreds of documented attacks in the Black Mausoleum and within the POW prison area. Of these attacks, an astonishing 150 have caused the witness of the attacks to actually collapse. There have been sightings of a white figure, unexplained smells, auditory anomalies, including knocking noises, both under the ground and inside the tomb. Dead animals are found, unmarked, in front of the Black Mausoleum. People have complained that an unseen entity has pulled their hair, grabbed their legs, grabbed their arms, hit, burned, or bit them. One or two have even claimed to be possessed. Now, I'm not too sure about that, but as a result, that area has been exorcised twice, both times apparently unsuccessful. So it's the story of George Mackenzie and his hauntings is quite bizarre to say the least.
Wow. Yeah, that's I mean, it's like I said, I was so disappointed that we didn't get to go there, but I am, these kinds of things make me um, anticipate the day that I am able to get there and check
Hmm.
out these
Hmm.
things. I mean, Greyfriars Cemetery is really pretty famous. Just, it's got a lot of well-known Edinburgh people of note buried there. But of course, too, and I think as kids, or maybe not kids today, but I know when I was growing up, Disney made a movie about Greyfriar Bobby, the dog,
Right,
who
right.
spent 14 years at his owner's gravesite until the dog passed away. I think it was like 16 years old. But I don't know if there's any hauntings around that one, but it's just such an
And the
interesting
dog is now
thing.
buried in the cemetery as well, right beside his
Right.
owner. And there's
Yes.
a statue and a plaque
Yeah, and there's
commemorating Boggy.
there is, and there's a statue as well that's on top of a drinking fountain that's nearby as well too, with the dog. And I think it was a Skye Terrier, I believe, is what
Hmm.
Greyfriar Bobby was. But his
I
owner was a
believe that
police
there are some
officer.
people who have seen a dog apparition.
Hmm. Yeah, and so that was one of the things too that we had scheduled, was to take the guided tour through Greyfriars in order to learn about all of the interesting history and hauntings and cool things that were there.